The harsh autumn wind howled across the Dakota Territory as the stagecoach rattled into White River, South Dakota, in October of 1876, carrying a passenger whose destiny would forever change with her arrival. Rose Patterson clutched her small carpet-bag with trembling hands, her face partially concealed by a worn bonnet that shadowed the purple bruise blooming beneath her right eye. The driver called out their arrival, his voice barely audible over the rumble of wooden wheels against the rutted main street of the frontier town. Rose winced as she attempted to stand, her ribs protesting with sharp, stabbing pain. 3 weeks of travel had done little to heal the injuries inflicted by the man she'd fled in Boston. Her letter of response to the advertisement for a mail-order bride had been her salvation, her only escape from a life that had nearly killed her. Now, as the coach lurched to a halt, fear mingled with desperate hope in her chest. "White River," the driver announced again. "End of the line, miss." Rose gathered what little courage remained within her and stepped down onto the wooden platform of the stage depot. Her gaze darted nervously around the dusty main street of White River, searching for the man who had agreed to marry her. Quinn Crawford had described himself as a cattle rancher with a modest spread outside town. They had exchanged only 3 letters before he had sent money for her passage west. In her desperate situation, Rose had embellished her own qualities while concealing her circumstances. Now, arriving battered and frightened, she wondered if he would send her away on the next stage. The depot was nearly empty, save for a tall figure standing in the shadows of the awning. He stepped forward, and Rose felt her breath catch. Quinn Crawford was not what she had expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the western sun, he carried himself with quiet confidence. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his worn denim jacket. When he removed his hat, revealing eyes the color of a summer sky, Rose felt herself shrink further into her shawl. "Miss Patterson?" His voice was deep with a gentleness that surprised her. "Mr. Crawford," she acknowledged, forcing herself to meet his gaze despite the shame burning in her cheeks. She knew how she must look thin, bruised, and frightened. His expression changed as he took in her appearance, jaw tightening as his eyes narrowed on the visible bruise. "You're hurt." It wasn't a question, and Rose felt her carefully constructed story crumbling before she could even begin to tell it. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. She would not cry. Not here. Not now. "I can explain," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand if you wish to nullify our agreement." Quinn studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate movements, he picked up her carpet bag and offered his arm. "Let's get you to the doctor first. We can talk after." The walk to the doctor's office was mercifully short. Rose felt the eyes of the townspeople following them, their curious glances and hushed whispers adding to her humiliation. Quinn kept her close to his side, his arm a steady support as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. Dr. Franklin was a kind-faced older man who asked no questions as he examined Rose's injuries, the bruised ribs, the fading marks on her wrists, the split lip that had barely healed. Quinn waited outside, and when Rose emerged, her face freshly washed and a clean bandage on her forehead, he stood immediately. "The doc says you need rest," Quinn said quietly. "I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house. Mrs. Miller runs a good place." Relief and confusion warred within Rose. "You're not taking me to your ranch?" Quinn shook his head, his expression softening. "Not yet. You need time to heal, and we need to talk honestly with each other. I didn't agree to marry a stranger only to rush you into something else you might regret." As they walked to the boarding house, Rose found herself studying the man beside her. There was a steadiness to Quinn Crawford that she had never encountered before. He moved with purpose, nodding respectfully to those they passed on the street, but his attention remained primarily on her, ensuring her comfort with each step. Mrs. Miller, a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes, greeted them at the door of the boarding house. "So this is your bride-to-be, Mr. Crawford?" Her eyebrows rose slightly at Rose's appearance, but to her credit, She showed no other reaction. "Miss Patterson will be staying with you for a time, Mrs. Miller," Quinn explained. "She's had a difficult journey." The older woman nodded, understanding passing between them. "I'll take good care of her, don't you worry." Rose's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt and a window that overlooked the main street. Mrs. Miller brought up a tray with tea and sandwiches, leaving them alone after assuring Rose that she needed only to ring the bell if she required anything. Quinn remained standing, hat in hand, as Rose perched uncertainly on the edge of the bed. The silence stretched between them until he finally spoke. "I think we need to start over," he said. "My name is Quinn Crawford. I own the Double C Ranch about 5 miles outside town. I raise cattle and horses, and I've been in these parts for 8 years now." Rose nodded, her fingers twisting in her lap. "I'm Rose Patterson, formerly of Boston. She faltered, unsure how to explain her situation without revealing too much of her shame. Quinn took a seat in the room's only chair, leaning forward with his forearms resting on his knees. "Someone hurt you, more than once from the look of it." It wasn't a question, but Rose answered anyway. "Yes." "Was it family?" She shook her head. "A man I worked for. After my parents died of influenza last year, I took a position as a housekeeper for a businessman. He seemed respectable at first, but," she trailed off, the memories too painful to articulate. Quinn's expression darkened, but his voice remained gentle. "You don't need to tell me the details unless you want to. But I need to know one thing: is anyone coming after you?" The question sent a chill through Rose. "He doesn't know where I went. I left in the night, after she swallowed hard. "After the last time, I changed my name on the journey. The Rose Patterson you've been writing to was born on the stagecoach heading west." Quinn nodded slowly. "Smart. But I should know your real name if we're to build any kind of life together." "Rebecca," she whispered. "Rebecca Prentice. But I'd prefer to be Rose now. Rebecca died in Boston." "Rose it is then," he agreed. "Now, here's what I propose. You'll stay here with Mrs. Miller until you're healed and rested. I'll pay for your room and board. If, after you've had time to think, you still wish to marry me, we'll proceed. If not, I'll help you get settled somewhere else here in White River, or another town if you prefer." His offer stunned Rose. "Why would you do that? You paid for my passage. You expected a bride, not this." She gestured vaguely at herself. Quinn's eyes met hers steadily. "I advertised for a wife because I want a partner, not because I'm looking to own someone. Whatever brought you here, whatever happened before, that ends now. Your past ends at my door, Rose. All that matters is what we build from here forward." His words washed over her like a cleansing rain, offering something she hadn't dared hope for: a chance to truly start anew. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll rest and heal," Quinn replied, rising to his feet. "I'll come by tomorrow if that's agreeable to you." Rose nodded, unexpected gratitude tightening her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford." "Quinn," he corrected gently. "If we're to know each other, you might as well use my given name." "Quinn," she repeated, testing the name on her lips. "Thank you, Quinn." After he left, Rose found herself standing at the window, watching as he crossed the street to the general store. There was something in the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, strong but not threatening, that gave her the first flicker of hope she'd felt in months. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had found not just escape, but sanctuary. The following week passed in a blur of rest and cautious discovery. Quinn visited daily, usually in the afternoon after attending to his ranch duties. He brought small gifts: a book of poetry, a jar of honey from his own hives, a soft woolen shawl when the autumn winds grew colder. They talked for hours, Quinn carefully avoiding pressing for details about her past, while freely sharing stories of his own journey west after the Civil War. Rose learned that he had fought for the Union, though he spoke little of the battles. He had come to Dakota Territory with nothing but determination and the skills he'd learned on his family's small farm in Pennsylvania. Through hard work and a knack for breeding sturdy horses, he had built the Double C into a respectable operation. It's not the biggest spread, he told her as they walked slowly down White River's main street one crisp afternoon. But it turns a profit, and I've built a good house. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a porch that catches the evening light, something beautiful. Rose found herself wanting to see this house, to discover if she could make a home there. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish smudges, and her ribs no longer ached with every breath. More importantly, something inside her was healing. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long was gradually receding. Mrs. Miller had proven to be a godsend, fussing over Rose's health while respecting her privacy. She had helped Rose alter one of her dresses, taking it in to fit her too thin frame, and had spent evenings teaching her to knit. A useful skill for a rancher's wife, the older woman had said with a wink. Those Dakota winters are fierce, and a man always needs warm socks. By the end of the second week, Rose had made a decision. After dinner one evening, as she and Quinn sat in the boarding house parlor under Mrs. Miller's discreet supervision, she gathered her courage. "I'd like to see your ranch," she said quietly, "if the offer still stands." Quinn's face brightened with a smile that transformed his weathered features. "The offer stands firm as ever, Rose. I can bring the wagon tomorrow, take you out for the day. No obligations, just to see the place." Rose nodded, her own smile tentative but genuine. "I'd like that." The next morning dawned clear and cool, with the scent of pine and prairie grass carried on the breeze. Quinn arrived promptly at 9, driving a well-maintained wagon pulled by 2 matching bay horses. He helped Rose up to the seat, his hands strong but gentle at her waist. As they left White River behind, Rose felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in golden autumn grass, stands of cottonwood trees with leaves turning bright yellow, and in the distance, the darker line of pine-covered ridges. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the vastness of the sky above them. "Different from Boston," Quinn observed. "In every way possible," Rose agreed, tilting her face to feel the sun on her skin. There, the buildings blocked the sky. Here, it seems endless. The journey to the Double C took just over an hour, with Quinn pointing out landmarks along the way. The creek that provided water for his cattle, the neighbor's place 2 miles to the east, the old hunting trails used by the Lakota people who still occasionally pass through the territory. "The government keeps pushing them further onto the reservation," Quinn said, his voice taking on a note of disapproval. "But I've had no trouble with the small hunting parties. I respect their ways, they respect mine. Old Chief Running Elk and I have an understanding." As they crested a rise in the land, Quinn drew the wagon to a halt. "There it is, Double C Ranch." Rose's breath caught at the sight before her. The ranch was nestled in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by gentle slopes. A stream ran along one edge of the property, feeding into a small pond. The house itself was larger than she had imagined, a solid 2-story structure built of squared logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures. "You built all this?" she asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "With these 2 hands and a fair bit of help," Quinn acknowledged. "The house took 3 years. I lived in the barn while I built it, determined to do it right." As they approached, Rose noticed the details: curtains at the windows, flower boxes on the porch railing, a rocking chair positioned to catch the afternoon sun. It wasn't just a house. Quinn had created a home, even without a wife to share it. A young man emerged from the barn as they pulled up to the house, wiping his hands on a rag. "Thought I heard you coming back, boss." "Jesse," Quinn greeted him. "This is Miss Patterson. Rose, this is Jesse Turner, my ranch hand. He lives in the bunkhouse out back with Pedro Alvarez, who's probably out checking the north pasture." Jesse tipped his hat respectfully, his freckled face breaking into a friendly smile. "Pleasure to meet you, madam. Boss has been talking about nothing else for weeks." Rose felt a blush warm her cheeks as Quinn cleared his throat. "That'll do, Jesse. Would you mind taking care of the team?" I'd like to show Miss Patterson around." The interior of the house surprised Rose even more than its exterior. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, the floors covered with woven rugs, and the walls adorned with simple but pleasing artwork. The kitchen boasted a large cast-iron stove, a pump at the sink, and ample cupboard space. "The bedrooms are upstairs," Quinn explained, leading her through the main floor. "Mine and, well, what would be yours, should you decide to stay? There's a small room I use for reading and accounts, and I built a proper bathing room off the kitchen. It takes work to heat the water, but having a real bath after a long day is worth every effort." Rose ran her fingers along the smooth surface of the dining table, trying to imagine herself in this space, preparing meals, sitting across from Quinn in the evenings. The image came more easily than she expected. "Would you like to see the garden?" Quinn asked, watching her closely. "It's not much this time of year, but I've managed to keep it producing." The garden plot behind the house was neatly tended, with late-season vegetables still growing in rows. A small orchard of young apple trees stood beyond, and next to the house was a herb garden that still offered greenery despite the advancing season. "You've done all this yourself?" Rose asked, kneeling to examine the rosemary bush that sent its fragrance into the air when she touched it. "I believe in self-sufficiency," Quinn replied. "The winters here can be isolating. Best to be prepared with stored food and things to keep one occupied." They spent the afternoon exploring the property, with Quinn showing her the barn where he kept his prized horses, the chicken coop that provided eggs and meat, and the smokehouse where he preserved game and beef for the winter months. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they sat on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the changing light on the landscape. "What do you think?" Quinn asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. Rose considered her answer, wanting to be honest with both him and herself. "It's more than I expected. You've built something remarkable here." "But?" he prompted, sensing her hesitation. "But I'm still afraid," she admitted, staring down at her hands. "Not of you. I don't think you would ever hurt me. I'm afraid of failing. I know nothing about ranching or living in this wilderness. I can cook and clean and sew. But what if that's not enough? What if I disappoint you?" Quinn set his coffee cup aside and turned to face her, his expression earnest. "Rose, I didn't advertise for a ranch hand or a housekeeper. I could hire those. I advertised for a wife because I'm tired of living alone, of having no one to share my thoughts with, no one to build a future with." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I don't expect perfection. I expect partnership. We can learn together what works for us." His sincerity touched something deep within Rose, a place that had been protected and walled off for too long. "I'd like to try," she whispered, "if you're willing to be patient with me." The smile that illuminated Quinn's face was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "Nothing would make me happier, Rose." "When would you like to have the wedding?" "Soon," she decided, "before winter sets in. I'd like to be settled before the snow comes." They were married 2 weeks later in White River's small church, with Mrs. Miller arranging a simple reception at the boarding house afterward. Rose wore a dress of soft blue wool that Quinn had bought from the mercantile, and he wore a new shirt with his best denims. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Pastor Wilkins speaking of new beginnings and forgiveness. Rose's hands trembled as Quinn slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, but when he looked into her eyes as he spoke his vows, she felt steadier than she had in years. This man, this stranger, who was now her husband, had offered her a safe harbor in a world that had shown her little kindness. That night, as they returned to the ranch, her new home, Rose felt the weight of expectation settle around her. Quinn must have sensed her anxiety, for after showing her to the bedroom that was now hers, he surprised her. "I'll be sleeping in the spare room tonight," he said quietly, "and for as long as you need. There's no rush, Rose. We have time to know each other properly." Relief and gratitude flooded through her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm sorry." "No apologies," he interrupted gently. "Not for this, not ever for needing time. Your past ends at my door, remember? We start fresh, at your pace. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and learning. Rose threw herself into mastering the rhythms of ranch life, determined to be a true partner to Quinn. She learned to collect eggs without startling the hens, to churn butter from the cream of their 2 milk cows, and to tend the garden with care. Quinn was patient, showing her how to preserve vegetables for winter, teaching her to recognize the signs of approaching weather changes, and introducing her to the horses one by one. Rose discovered that she had a natural affinity for the animals, particularly a gentle mare named Willow that Quinn had been training as a riding horse. "She's yours if you want her," Quinn offered one afternoon as Rose fed the mare an apple from her palm. "Every ranch wife should have her own mount." November brought the first snowfall, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse that took Rose's breath away. The house felt especially cozy with the fire crackling in the hearth and savory stews bubbling on the stove. In the evenings, they would sit in the main room, Quinn reading aloud from one of his books while Rose worked on knitting or mending. These quiet moments became precious to Rose, a healing balm to her wounded spirit. Quinn never pressed her about her past, never demanded more from her than she was ready to give. The nightmares that had plagued her in White River gradually became less frequent, though they didn't disappear entirely. One night in early December, Rose woke gasping from a particularly vivid dream, her former employer's face looming in her mind. She sat up, trying to calm her racing heart, only to find Quinn standing in the doorway, concern etched on his features. "I heard you cry out," he explained, remaining at a respectful distance. "Are you all right?" Rose drew a shaky breath. "Just a dream. I'm sorry I woke you." Quinn hesitated, then asked, "Would you like some tea? I find it helps when sleep proves elusive." They sat at the kitchen table as snow fell silently outside, steam rising from their mugs in the lamplight. Rose felt the remnants of the nightmare receding as the familiar comfort of the kitchen, her kitchen, now surrounded her. "His name was Victor Harrington," she said suddenly, the words emerging before she could reconsider. "He owned a shipping company in Boston. After my parents died of influenza, I had nowhere to go. The boarding school where I'd been teaching couldn't keep me on without proper credentials, and I had no family left. He offered me a position as his housekeeper." Quinn remained silent, his eyes steady on her face as she continued. At first, he was merely demanding, expecting perfection in every detail. Then he began to notice me differently. When I rejected his advances, he became angry. The first time he struck me, he apologized profusely afterward, blamed it on business troubles. I believed him. Rose's fingers tightened around her mug. It escalated gradually. A slap for a perceived slight, a shove for a meal that didn't please him, then worse. I tried to leave twice, but he found me both times. The last night, I thought he might kill me. He had been drinking heavily, upset over a business deal gone wrong. I waited until he passed out, took what little money I could find, and fled. Quinn's jaw was tight, his knuckles white where he gripped his mug, but his voice remained gentle. "You were very brave to leave." Rose shook her head. "Not brave, desperate. I saw your advertisement in the newspaper the next morning while hiding in a cafe. It seemed like divine intervention, a chance to get far away, to some place he would never think to look." "And you were right," Quinn affirmed. "He'll never find you here." "But I lied to you," Rose confessed, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time. "I wasn't a schoolteacher from a good family, as I claimed in my letters. I was a desperate woman running for her life." Quinn reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "May I?" he asked, and when she nodded, he covered her fingers with his own. "We all have pasts we might wish were different, Rose. What matters is who we choose to be now." In that moment, with his warm hand covering hers and his eyes filled with understanding rather than judgment, something shifted within Rose. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long began to give way to something else, something that felt remarkably like hope. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The weeks turned to months, and as winter's grip tightened on the Dakota territory, life at the Double C settled into a pattern that brought Rose unexpected contentment. The house that had seemed so foreign upon her arrival gradually became her home in truth as well as name. She added small touches, embroidered pillows, dried flower arrangements, curtains she sewed from fabric Quinn brought from town. Quinn's respect for her boundaries never wavered, but as Rose's confidence grew, so did her affection for the quiet, steady man who had given her a new life. She found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the strength in his hands and the kindness in his eyes. At night, alone in her room, she would sometimes wonder what it might be like to truly be his wife in every sense. The opportunity to discover the answer came unexpectedly in January, during a blizzard that howled around the house for 3 days straight. Confined indoors, they passed the time with games of checkers, baking bread when the supplies ran low, and talking more openly than ever before. Quinn told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about losing his parents young and being raised by a stern uncle. He spoke of the war, not of battles, but of the friends he'd made and lost. And he told her of his journey west, of the hardships and joys of building something from nothing. "I never expected to find someone to share it with," he admitted as they sat before the fire on the third evening of the storm. "Not someone like you." Rose looked up from her knitting. "Someone like me. Someone strong enough to survive what you did, brave enough to start over, kind enough to see the good in a rough place like this." His eyes, reflecting the firelight, held hers. "Someone I find myself thinking about from the moment I wake until I sleep." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Rose. She set aside her knitting and moved from her chair to sit beside him on the small sofa. "I think about you too," she confessed, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I've never known anyone like you, Quinn. Never known a man could be so patient and kind." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I would wait forever if that's what you needed, Rose." She shook her head slowly. "I don't want to wait anymore." That night, Rose invited Quinn into her room, into her life completely. His touch was gentle, his patience infinite, as he learned what brought her pleasure rather than pain. For the first time, Rose understood that physical intimacy could be a gift rather than a weapon, a connection rather than a subjugation. Afterward, lying in his arms as the storm raged outside, Rose felt a peace she had thought forever beyond her reach. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, the words emerging naturally, without fear. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Rose Crawford, more than I have words to express." Spring came to the Dakota territory in fits and starts, with late snowstorms giving way to days of brilliant sunshine and renewed life. As the land awakened, so too did the ranch, with new calves wobbling beside their mothers in the pastures and seedlings pushing through the soil in Rose's expanded garden. Rose blossomed along with the season, her confidence growing with each new skill mastered. She learned to ride Willow with increasing proficiency, accompanying Quinn on his rounds of the property. Under Jesse's patient tutelage, she even learned to handle a rifle, though she prayed she would never need to use it. The changes were not merely external. The nightmares that had haunted her became rare occurrences, and the flinch that had once accompanied any sudden movement from Quinn disappeared entirely. She learned to laugh freely again, to find joy in simple pleasures, the first wildflowers of spring, the taste of fresh honey from Quinn's hives, the warmth of his embrace at the end of a long day. Their first real test as a couple came in early summer when Quinn was thrown from his horse while checking fences in a remote corner of the property. Jesse found him and brought him home with a broken arm and a gash on his head that left him dizzy and disoriented. For 3 days, Rose barely left his side, tending his wounds, ensuring he rested, and managing the ranch operations with a capability that surprised even herself. She worked alongside Jesse and Pedro, making decisions about the cattle, dealing with a minor dispute with a neighboring rancher, and keeping everything running smoothly until Quinn recovered enough to resume his duties. "You're quite something, Mrs. Crawford," Quinn told her as he watched her check the splint on his arm. "I always knew you were strong, but seeing you handle everything these past days—" He shook his head in admiration. Rose smiled, a confidence in her expression that would have been unimaginable months before. "I had a good teacher. And a partnership, remember?" As summer progressed, bringing with it the hard work of haying and the constant vigilance against prairie fires, Rose began to experience a peculiar fatigue and occasional morning nausea that she recognized from observing other women in her life. When she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she was certain. She kept the knowledge to herself for nearly a week, examining her feelings about this unexpected development. There was anxiety, certainly childbirth was dangerous, and raising a child on the frontier presented countless challenges. But overriding these concerns was a burgeoning joy, a sense of rightness that she had not anticipated. Rose chose a quiet evening to share the news after they had finished dinner and moved to the porch to watch the sunset paint the western sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. "I have something to tell you," she began, her hands clasped in her lap to still their trembling. Quinn turned to her, his expression open and curious. "What is it, Rose?" "I believe," she paused, taking a steadying breath, "I believe we're going to have a child, around Christmas if my calculations are correct." For a moment Quinn sat perfectly still, as though processing her words. Then his face transformed with a joy so profound it brought tears to Rose's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, reaching for her hands. "Our baby." His reaction calmed the last of her fears. "You're happy then?" "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Quinn said, moving to kneel before her chair. "Rose, you've given me everything I never dared hope for a true partner, a love I never thought possible, and now a family." His voice grew thick with emotion. Are you all right with this?" Rose nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I am. I never thought I would want this after everything. I was afraid. But now, with you." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Now I can't imagine anything more right." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Quinn threw himself into building a cradle, crafting it from cherry wood with painstaking attention to detail. Rose sewed tiny garments, setting aside her fear with each small stitch. They converted the small reading room downstairs into a nursery, moving Quinn's books upstairs to make room for the impending arrival. As her body changed, growing round with new life, Rose found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place. The woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in White River, battered and broken, seemed like someone from another lifetime, a ghost, whose pain she could remember but no longer fully feel. Quinn's tenderness increased with her pregnancy, his protectiveness sometimes bordering on excessive, until Rose gently reminded him that women had been having babies on the frontier since time immemorial. "Not my wife," he would respond, his hand caressing the swell of her belly. "Not carrying my child." The baby arrived not at Christmas, but during the first major snowstorm of December, 2 weeks earlier than expected. The labor began in the early morning hours, with Rose waking to the unmistakable cramping pains that signaled the beginning of her child's journey into the world. Quinn rode through the swirling snow to fetch Mrs. Miller, who had promised months before to attend the birth. The hours that followed tested Rose's strength and courage as nothing in her life ever had. But throughout the ordeal, she held on to Quinn's promise. Her past ended at his door. This pain was purposeful, leading not to degradation, but to new life. As the last light faded from the winter sky, their son entered the world with a robust cry that filled the bedroom. Mrs. Miller cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing him in Rose's trembling arms. "He's perfect," Rose whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the miniature features that somehow combined her own with Quinn's. Quinn, who had paced the floor below during the final hours of labor, was summoned to meet his son. His face, when he saw the baby nestled against Rose's breast, held a wonder that made her heart swell with love. "We have a son," she told him, her voice weak but triumphant. "I thought perhaps we might name him William, after your father." Quinn carefully sat beside her on the bed, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "William," he repeated. "William Crawford, a fine name for a fine boy." Mrs. Miller remained with them for a week, helping Rose adjust to motherhood and ensuring both mother and child thrived before returning to White River. The winter settled in around the Double C Ranch, but within the sturdy log walls, the family created their own warmth and light. As Christmas approached, Rose found herself reflecting on the year that had passed, a year that had begun in terror and was ending in joy beyond measure. On Christmas Eve, after William had been fed and settled in his cradle, she joined Quinn before the fire in the main room. "I have something for you," she said, presenting him with a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. Quinn unwrapped it carefully to reveal a framed sampler that Rose had worked on in secret for months. Embroidered in rich colors were the words he had spoken to her that first day in White River. "Your past ends at my door." "To remind us both," Rose explained as Quinn traced the stitching with his finger, "that love can heal what seemed beyond repair." Quinn set the frame aside gently before drawing her into his arms. "You are the greatest gift I could ever receive, Rose Crawford, you and our son." As they held each other before the crackling fire, the wind singing in the chimney and their baby sleeping peacefully nearby, Rose felt the truth of it settle deep in her bones. The path that had led her here had been marked by pain and fear, but it had delivered her to this moment, this man, this life full of promise and possibility. Her past had ended at Quinn's door, just as he had promised. But their future stretched before them, limitless and bright, a journey they would travel together. Spring returned to the Dakota Territory, bringing with it William's first smile, his first laugh, the first time he rolled over on the quilt Rose spread in the grass behind the house. Quinn built a fence around the garden to keep the curious chickens from scratching up the tender seedlings, and Rose planted not just vegetables, but flowers, bright splashes of color that proclaimed her permanence, her intention to put down roots as surely as the rose bushes she nurtured along the south side of the house. Life settled into new rhythms dictated by William's needs and the seasons of the ranch. Rose learned to balance motherhood with her responsibilities as Quinn's partner, wearing the baby in a sling Mrs. Miller had shown her how to fashion while she worked in the garden or the kitchen. Quinn would often take William for an hour in the evenings, cradling him in one strong arm while he read aloud from one of his books, his deep voice soothing the baby to sleep. In July of 1878, as William celebrated his 7th month of life by attempting to crawl across the porch, a letter arrived from White River that changed the careful equilibrium of their lives. The postmaster had forwarded it from Boston, where it had been addressed to Rebecca Prentice, in care of any postmaster in Dakota Territory. Rose's hands trembled as she recognized the handwriting not Victor Harrington's, but that of Sarah Collins, a kitchen maid who had worked alongside her in the Harrington household. She opened it with Quinn, standing protectively at her side. William balanced on his hip. "Dear Rebecca," the letter began, "I pray this finds you, though I have little hope given the vastness of the territories. I write with news that may bring you peace. Victor Harrington is dead." Rose gasped, her eyes flying to Quinn's face before returning to the letter. "He was killed in a duel with Mr. Frederick Thornton, whose wife he had apparently been pursuing. Boston society is scandalized, but those of us who knew his true nature can only feel relief. His sister has inherited the house and business and has proven a much kinder mistress. She asked after you, and I told her only that you had left seeking better opportunities. If this reaches you, please know that you are safe now, truly safe. Your friend, Sarah." The letter fluttered from Rose's fingers to the porch floor. Quinn set William on his blanket before kneeling to retrieve it, his expression solemn as he scanned the contents. "He's dead," Rose said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "He can never find me." Quinn set the letter aside and took her hands in his. "You are already safe here, Rose. But yes, now there's nothing left to fear." That evening, after William was asleep, Rose and Quinn sat on the porch watching fireflies dance above the garden. The letter lay on the small table between them, its message still reverberating through Rose's thoughts. "I should feel something more, shouldn't I?" she asked finally. "Relief or satisfaction or something. But I feel oddly empty." Quinn considered her words before responding. "Perhaps because you had already moved beyond him in your heart. You built a new life here, became a new woman stronger than he could ever imagine. His death changes nothing about who you are now." Rose nodded slowly. "I think you're right. The Rebecca who feared him no longer exists. Rose Crawford has different concerns." She glanced toward the open window where William's cradle sat just inside. "More important ones." Quinn took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "What would you like to do with the letter?" Rose thought for a moment, then stood and moved to the edge of the porch. With deliberate movements, she tore the letter into tiny pieces and released them into the evening breeze, watching as they scattered and disappeared into the gathering darkness. "There," she said, returning to sit beside Quinn. "The last piece of that life gone with the wind." Quinn wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against his side. "To new beginnings," he murmured against her hair. "We've already begun," Rose replied, turning her face up to his. "This is just another day in the life we're building." Their kiss, tender and unhurried, contained all the promises they had made and kept, all the trust they had earned from each other, all the love that had grown between two wounded souls who had found healing in unlikely circumstances. As summer gave way to autumn, and autumn to another Dakota winter, the Crawford family continued to thrive. William grew into a sturdy toddler with Quinn's blue eyes and Rose's determination. The Double C Ranch prospered, with Quinn's careful management and Rose's increasingly confident contributions to the operation. In the spring of 1879, Rose discovered she was expecting their second child. The news brought joy tempered with practical considerations. The house would need expansion, responsibilities would need redistribution. But unlike her first pregnancy, this one came without fear, only anticipation. "Another Christmas baby, do you think?" Quinn asked as they planned the new bedroom that would need to be added to the house. Rose laughed, resting her hand on the slight curve of her stomach. "Perhaps a bit earlier this time. William might appreciate a sibling for his birthday gift." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. William, now nearly 2 years old, patted his mother's growing belly with gentle hands, repeating the word "baby" with solemn concentration. Quinn divided his time between ranch work and building the promised addition to the house, determined to have it completed before winter set in and their family expanded. In late November, just as the first snow began to dust the prairie, Rose gave birth to a daughter, Eliza Jane Crawford, named for both their mothers. Unlike William's dramatic entry into the world during a blizzard, Eliza arrived peacefully in the pre-dawn hours, welcomed by her parents and the capable Mrs. Miller, who had once again braved the journey from White River to attend the birth. "She has your coloring," Quinn observed as he held his daughter for the first time, marveling at the dusting of auburn hair that crowned her tiny head. "And your spirit, I'd wager, given how eager she was to join us." Rose, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband cradle their daughter with the same wonder he had shown 2 years before with William. "2 children," she murmured. "If someone had told me 3 years ago that this would be my life." Quinn's eyes met hers over Eliza's sleeping form. "Do you ever regret it? Coming west, marrying a stranger, building a life so different from what you knew?" Rose's answer came without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. This is where I was meant to be, Quinn. With you, with our children, on this land that's become home in every sense of the word. As Eliza and William grew, the Double C Ranch grew with them. Quinn added more acreage, expanded the cattle operation, and built a reputation for breeding some of the finest horses in the territory. Rose, no longer content to focus solely on the household, developed her own interests in the ranch business, particularly in the garden, which expanded into a small but profitable venture, selling vegetables and preserves to the growing population of White River. By the time William was 5 and Eliza 3, the Crawford family had firmly established themselves as respected members of the community. Quinn served on the town council, making the journey into White River monthly for meetings. Rose organized a lending library that operated out of the church basement, sharing her love of reading with neighbors who had limited access to books. Life was not without its challenges. The Dakota winters remained harsh, sometimes isolating the ranch for weeks at a time. There were years when drought threatened the crops and cattle, when illness swept through the community claiming lives, when the uncertainties of frontier existence tested their resilience. But through it all, Rose and Quinn faced each challenge as they had promised together, as partners, their strengths complementing each other, their love deepening with each passing season. In the summer of 1883, as White River prepared for an Independence Day celebration that would bring together families from throughout the region, Rose found herself standing in the doorway of their home, watching Quinn teaching William to ride his own pony, while Eliza supervised critically from her perch on the corral fence. The scene struck her with its ordinary beauty, the man she loved, the children they had created together, the home they had built with their own hands. 7 years had passed since she had stepped off that stagecoach, battered and desperate. 7 years of healing, of growth, of a happiness she had once thought impossible. Quinn looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, still as warm as the day they had married, drew her forward into the sunshine to join her family. "What is you looking so thoughtful, Mrs. Crawford?" he asked as she approached, his arm sliding naturally around her waist. Rose leaned into him, watching as William successfully guided his pony around the corral. "I was just thinking about beginnings and endings, about doors closing and opening." Quinn understood, as he always did. "Your past ended at my door," he quoted softly, "but I never imagined the future we would build beyond it." Rose turned in his embrace, looking up into the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, yet still caused her heart to quicken. "Neither did I. But I wouldn't change a single step that led me here." The journey from Rebecca Prentice to Rose Crawford had been marked by pain and fear, by courage and hope, by the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received. What had begun as escape had become salvation, not just from the man who had hurt her, but from the limited vision she had once held of what her life could be. Here, on the Dakota prairie, with Quinn and their children, Rose had found not just safety, but purpose, not just shelter, but home in its truest sense. The past had ended at Quinn's door, just as he had promised that day in White River. And beyond that threshold, they had written a new story together, one of healing, of family, of a love strong enough to overcome the darkest beginnings. As William's triumphant laugh rang out across the yard and Eliza clapped her hands in sisterly approval, Rose felt the familiar swell of gratitude that had become her daily companion. Life on the frontier was never easy, but it was rich with meaning, with connection, with the joy that comes from building something lasting out of brokenness. "I love you, Quinn Crawford," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of their shared history and the promise of their continuing journey. His kiss was gentle, a reaffirmation of all they had become to each other. "And I love you, Rose. Yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows we have yet to see." Hand in hand, they turned to watch their children, their hearts full with the knowledge that some endings are merely the necessary prelude to the most beautiful beginnings.